French President Macron has concluded his three-day state visit to China. On April 9th, on the plane returning home, he said in an interview with Politico, the U.S. political news network, and two French journalists that Europe must reduce its dependence on the U.S. It also needs to avoid falling into a confrontation between China and the U.S. on the Taiwan issue, a crisis that does not belong to Europe. His remarks immediately sparked public condemnation. Macron said the great risk for Europe is to fall into a crisis that does not belong to us because it will prevent us from establishing strategic autonomy. He also said, the question Europeans need to answer is, do we have an interest in speeding up on the subject of Taiwan? No, the worst of things would be to think that we Europeans must be followers on this subject and adapt ourselves to an American rhythm and a Chinese overreaction. The Chinese Communist Party, or CCP, actively supports Macron's concept of strategic autonomy. Beijing officials constantly refer to this concept in their dealings with European countries. According to French officials, Macron and CCP leader Xi Jinping have discussed the Taiwan issue intensively. According to a press release by the Chinese Foreign Ministry on the Taiwan issue, Xi stressed that anyone who expects China to compromise and back down on the Taiwan issue is delusional. Macron seemed to agree with this assessment. Macron said, "The Europeans cannot solve the crisis in Ukraine. How can we credibly take on the Taiwan issue and say, 'Be careful, if you do something wrong, we will be there'? Doing so would only increase tensions." Macron also said Europe has increased its dependence on the US for weapons and energy and must now focus on boosting Europe's defense industry. After his meeting with Xi, Macron said Europe should reduce its dependence on the US dollar. This is also a key policy goal for China and Russia. Macron brought a large business delegation to China this time, including Airbus and nuclear energy producer Électricité de France. They signed a series of agreements during the visit. U.S. Senator Marco Rubio tweeted a video on April 9th, pointing out Macron's upsetting comments.
In fact, when Macron tried to play global superpower and send troops to North Africa to fight terrorists, he couldn't even get his own troops there. We had to fly them there, and we had to fly them back. He couldn't even get his own troops there. So if they're going to break off on their own and follow Macron's lead, that's going to save us a lot of money.
As for Macron saying that Europe should not get involved in other conflicts that are not ours.
So we need to find out, does Macron speak for Macron, or does Macron speak for Europe?
According to the Financial Times, two senior EU diplomats said Macron's comments would damage European and Ukrainian relations with the US and make it more difficult for the EU to develop a unified position against Beijing. One of the diplomats said, "This is not a victory for anyone other than Xi Jinping." The president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs tweeted, Macron doesn't want Europe to get caught up in crises that are not ours, like Taiwan, but he is perfectly fine with relying on U.S. security commitments to address crises like Ukraine and Europe. That's not strategic autonomy, that's strategic nonsense. The head of the European Parliament delegation for China relations denounced Macron's visit to China on April 10th as a complete disaster. Hours after Macron left Guangzhou to return to Paris, the Chinese People's Liberation Army, or PLA, launched a massive military exercise around Taiwan on April 8th. This came after Republic of China President Tsai Ing-wen concluded a 10-day visit to Central America and the U.S. and met with Speaker of the House of Representatives McCarthy in California. This military exercise by Beijing is an act of retaliation. It's clear that Beijing waited at least until Macron left Chinese airspace before starting the encirclement of Taiwan mock exercise, giving the French president a decent lead. The military exercise around Taiwan also triggered a series of effects. What has attracted the most public attention is the deployment of the Shandong aircraft carrier formation outside the First Island chain, reportedly conducting drills more than 400 nautical miles off the southeast coast of Taiwan. China's Eastern Theater said the Shandong carrier has participated in combat patrols, showing warplanes taking off from the carrier's deck. Taiwan, for its part, has been tracking the Shandong carrier in the Pacific Ocean. Taiwan's Ministry of Defense reported on April 10th that 4 J-15 fighter jets had entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone in the past 24 hours. The J-15 is the carrier-based version of the J-11 fighter. This is the first time that the J-15 has entered Taiwan's air defense identification zone. Beijing claims that the exercise will involve the deployment of ships, warplanes, and missiles in the waters around Taiwan, including simulated joint precision strikes against key targets and the continuous maintenance of advancing posture around Taiwan. On April 9th, the Chinese Eastern Theater released a short video. It was a simulated attack showing missiles being fired at Taiwan from land, sea, and air, 2 of which exploded after hitting their targets. Life in Taiwan goes on as usual, with no signs of panic or disruption, and civilian flights are operating as usual. But there are people who are genuinely worried about the impending war. President Tsai traveling to different countries has the effect of increasing everyone's awareness of Taiwan in the international spectrum. Of course, it can't be avoided that there will be some verbal and military intimidation from China. But I think because this verbal and military intimidation has been going on for such a long time, it's impossible for it to go away.
I'm always planning. For example, my child also has a foreign passport, so I'm thinking a lot, very far ahead.
Because of fear of war?
Yes, I think the war. When China was still more peaceful, not like now with the severe lockdowns during COVID, I thought unification would not create any major problems for me. But looking at the situation in Hong Kong now, I think they're sort of issuing a warning.
Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense released a photo of the Taiwan Air Force guarding the Taiwan Strait on April 9th. In the photo, the designs of armbands worn by Air Force officers have unexpectedly caught the attention of the Taiwan public and become popular. One design is a Taiwanese black bear punching Winnie the Pooh, with the black bear representing the National Army and Winnie the Pooh mocking Xi Jinping. In another armband, a panda is slapped by an Air Force pilot, with the panda being the national treasure of China. Although the armbands aren't officially made by the Air Force, the military has allowed pilots to take to the skies as a moral booster. Many Taiwanese are buying them, and they are currently out of stock. Despite never having ruled Taiwan for a single day, the CCP claims Taiwan as its territory and has spent decades trying to isolate it diplomatically, not ruling out the use of force to take it over. As the CCP's official propaganda has intensified its brainwashing, many Chinese are conditioned to believe that Taiwan belongs to China and that unifying Taiwan by force is acceptable. Many other people believe that such a move would showcase China's supremacy. After all, we are compatriots, right? We cannot be too ruthless. We have to show our attitude. As long as it doesn't push us to a certain point, I think the military drills, should be enough for now.
I think the 3-day military drills may not be strong enough. We can continue to demonstrate China's capabilities, even under normal circumstances. That's what I think.
I think this, China conducting military drills, is a very normal thing, because firstly, we need to show our attitude, and we also need to show our ability to react like this. On the one hand, the biggest aspect is to show the US, not Taiwan, because I think whatever Taiwan says isn't very important. Japan and the US are watching the CCP military drill closely. On April 9th, the Shandong carrier conducted an air exercise in the waters off Japan's Okinawa Islands. Jet fighters and helicopters landed and took off in a total of 120 sorties from the Shandong carrier, which, along with 3 other warships and a support ship, came within 230 kilometers or 143 miles of Miyako Island, Japan. CNN reported that Japan's Joint Chiefs of Staff said Japan urgently deployed Air Self-Defense Force fighter jets in response. It was intimidating training. It is difficult to give a definitive answer regarding the intentions and objectives of the Chinese military's activities, but China has said the drills are a serious warning against Taiwan independent separatist forces colluding with external forces. China appears to have shown an uncompromising attitude regarding the issue of Taiwan. On April 10th, the European Union expressed concern over Chinese military drills around Taiwan, saying that the island's status should not be changed by force, as any escalation, accident, or use of force there would have huge global implications.
We
have always called and will continue to call for peace and stability in the Straits of Taiwan. We are firmly opposed to the use of force to make any attempt to unilaterally break the status quo in the Taiwan. That's all I can say about this. Since former U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan last August, Beijing has been firing live rounds of the Dongfeng series of ballistic missiles, in addition to large-scale military exercises in the waters around Taiwan. It now appears that Beijing may decide to launch a major military exercise near Taiwan whenever the Taiwanese president meets with senior U.S. officials. The CCP's increasing tendency to use military capabilities to achieve political goals sets a dangerous precedent for the Indo-Pacific region. On April 10th, the same day that the Communist Party's military exercises around Taiwan ended, the USS Milius, a guided missile destroyer of the U.S. 7th Fleet, sailed in the South China Sea near the Spratly Islands and deployed within 12 nautical miles of Mischief Reef. The Pacific Line of Defense, established by the U.S. and Japan's southwestern islands and the Philippines, has been tentatively completed, which is very important for the security of Taiwan. In addition to the 5 existing U.S. bases in the Philippines, 4 new bases have recently been announced. They are only 400 kilometers from Taiwan, and U.S. military aircraft can assist in Taiwan's defense in as little as 30 minutes, making it difficult for communist military forces to break through the first island chain during wartime. On April 11th, the U.S. and Philippines launched the largest joint military exercise in decades in the waters of the South China Sea and Taiwan Strait, a high-profile demonstration of the two countries' renewed and strengthened alliance. The annual exercise is called Balikatan, which means shoulder to shoulder. The exercise, which continues until April 28th, will focus on developing maritime security and amphibious operations and will include live-fire training, boat-sinking rocket assault, urban combat, air operations, cyber defense, counterterrorism, and humanitarian assistance. Some 12,200 U.S. troops, 5,400 Filipino troops, and 111 Australian troops are participating in the joint exercise, the largest in the 30-year history of such a drill. That is, the exercise involved more than 17,600 military personnel, almost twice as many as in the year 2022.
As the collaboration and partnerships grow in strength and reach, we not only amplify and upgrade the interoperability of our armed forces for mutual defense, humanitarian assistance, and disaster response, but just as importantly, contribute to the peace and stability of the Indo-Pacific region in a definitive manner.
This year's Balikatan will be the biggest ever, an indication of the growth of our alliance and how it continues to evolve to meet our shared goals.
All of these actions show that the U.S. is clearly preparing for a possible military invasion by the CCP, while the U.S. and the Philippines are working together to counter the CCP's provocative behavior in the South China Sea. Against this backdrop, why does Macron wish to become a friend of the increasingly isolated CCP? Macron's statement is evidently appreciated by the CCP. According to a WeChat public website of Xinhua News Agency, the official media of the CCP, when the U.S. is carrying out all-round containment, siege, and suppression against the CCP, it is also beneficial for the CCP to have Europe maintain an impartial position and keep a distance from the U.S. The article said that perhaps in retrospect a few years later, a major turnaround in Europe's strategic autonomy came from Macron's visit to China. It praised Macron's idea of reducing dependence on the US dollar as the same as the goals of Moscow and Beijing. President Macron's state visit to China is the first by a European head of state after China's comprehensive resumption of foreign exchanges and a successful convening of the two sessions. During the visit, the two heads of state had friendly, in-depth, and high-quality exchanges in Beijing and Guangzhou and reached a series of strategic consensus, charting the course and drawing the blueprint for China-France cooperation at bilateral China-EU and global levels. The CCP also gave the French president a red carpet welcome, which is rare. At the end of Macron's 3-day trip, Xi Jinping received him at his father's former official residence in Guangzhou. Xi Jinping took a walk in the courtyard with Macron and had tea together, in what appeared to be a very intimate exchange. Neither was wearing a tie. The CCP has great expectations for Macron. Beijing hopes to use Sino-French relations to leverage Sino-European relations and use Sino-European relations to divide U.S.-European relations. That is to say, under the circumstances that Sino-US relations are unlikely to improve in the short term, the consolidation, stability, and development of Sino-French and Sino-European relations are themselves promoting multipolarization and a strong response to the new Cold War of bloc confrontation led by the US. China and France will continue to support a multipolar world and great democracy in international relations, oppose a Cold War mentality and bloc confrontation, and jointly tackle all types of global challenges. President Macron and I have had in-depth exchanges of views on China-EU relations and agreed to focus on the positive agenda of the China-EU relations and resume bilateral exchanges, dialogue, and cooperation in all areas. France also wants something from the CCP as well. According to the Financial Times, Macron brought more than 50 French entrepreneurs to China, including executives from major companies such as Airbus and the French nuclear power company. 36 companies from both sides signed 18 cooperation agreements, including a purchase agreement for 160 Airbus civil aircraft worth a total of US $20 billion. As evidenced by the signing of these large orders, Macron is indeed anxious to get more orders from Beijing in an attempt to boost the French economy. The Bank of France recently forecasted that the French economy would enter a slowdown due to factors such as the energy crisis and high inflation. Economic growth would slow sharply from 2.6% last year to 0.3% this year. The French Statistics Office pointed out that the French industrial production suffered more difficulties than expected, making the overall situation worse. In addition, on April 7th, France and China issued a 51-point joint statement that specifically mentions deepening the dialogue between the French military's Pacific Ocean region and the CCP's Southern Theater. France now has 7 overseas provinces and territories in the Indo-Pacific, with a land area of 460,000 square kilometers and an exclusive economic zone of 9 million square kilometers. On them, 1.6 million French citizens live, and more than 7,000 armed forces soldiers are deployed. In addition, 30% of France's energy supply comes from the Persian Gulf. Therefore, France can indeed be regarded as an Indo-Pacific power that is closely related to the development and changes of the Indo-Pacific security situation. France's rivals in the Indo-Pacific region include Iran, Russia, North Korea, and most importantly, the CCP. The CCP's One Belt One Road, its claim to sovereignty over the South China Sea and the East China Sea, and the expansion of its naval fleet every 3 years to a size equal to the tonnage of the entire French Navy make unprecedented challenges for France in the Indo-Pacific. Macron's thinking is obvious. On the one hand, he wants France to maintain a certain military force in the Indo-Pacific, such as deploying 12 ships over the long term and strengthening strategic cooperation with allies. On the other hand, he seeks to deepen the dialogue between China's Southern Theater and the French military in the Pacific Ocean. In other words, Macron is seeking to re-establish France and Europe as a third way between the US and the CCP. What is really meant is for France to become a balancing power. Because of these perceived needs, Macron has given the CCP an opportunity to woo France and divide Europe and the US. However, it doesn't mean that Beijing will get what it wants. For example, the thawing of the China-Europe Comprehensive Investment Agreement, CIA, a major concern of the CCP, hasn't seen the light of day. During this period, Beijing made a major mistake in that it believes that China-EU relations are multifaceted and should not be dominated by the issue of the Ukraine crisis, and that Beijing doesn't need to be in complete agreement on this issue before pursuing cooperation in other areas. In contrast, in the eyes of the French public and the EU, how the CCP behaves in the Russia-Ukraine conflict is decisive for Europe-China relations. Defeating Russia is the common will of Europe and the US. Yet Xi Jinping has chosen Putin as his ally. In a very short period of time, you and I have witnessed repeated actions that have been provocative toward the People's Republic of China. And of course, China has the sovereign right to respond to these provocative actions, including conducting military maneuvers in strict compliance with international law. And everyone should respect the right of China, as well as other countries, to such actions. It can be predicted that there won't be any major breakthrough in the CCP's attempt to draw France in, restart Sino-European relations, and divide Europe and the US because of Macron's visit to China. It remains to be seen how far Macron will go in moving closer to the CCP to gain benefits. China's economy is in the midst of a major recession now that the driving economic trio, investment, exports, and retail, has almost stalled. Once the CCP can no longer throw money around, those wish lists Macron has hoped for may fall off gradually.